And okay, sorry. This session is about changing the face of violence against women. And unfortunately, in 2025, as we mark 30 years since the 4th World Conference on Women, the goal of achieving full equality for all women and girls is more critical than ever. And despite the progress made, we find ourselves navigating an increasingly complex landscape. So from the global polycrisis marking the economic instability, climate change issues, political unrest, coupled with growing pushback against women and girls' human rights, has intensified the challenges we are facing. In this evolving world, technology has brought immense opportunities, but it has also introduced new forms of violence against women and girls. Online harassment, cyberstalking, digital sexual exploitation, and image-based abuse are just a few examples of how technology is being weaponized against women and girls. These forms of violence are pervasive and often go unreported, amplifying the isolation and fear experienced by victims. Today, violence against women and girls remains, unfortunately, a global crisis. So, and the information published by the World Health Organization and its partners estimate that 1 in 3 women experience violence in their lifetime, a statistic that remains alarmingly high across all regions. This violence does not discriminate. It affects women of all ages and all backgrounds. The root causes are deeply embedded in societal norms, including poverty, gender stereotyping, patriarchy, misogyny, and increasingly the misuse of digital platforms today. Nearly 3 decades after the Beijing Declaration was adopted, significant work remains to create a world free from violence for all women and girls. Our discussions today must reflect the urgency of this mission. We must explore innovative strategies to combat these emerging threats, strengthen legal frameworks, and ensure that technology becomes a tool of empowerment, not oppression and exploitation. Thank you for joining us today, because as I've said earlier, together we are definitely stronger. Together, through our dialogue, our advocacy and action, we can drive the change needed to end violence against women and girls in all its forms. So I thank all the speakers. Thank you so much. And to all of you attending for your interest and your passion to do something about this violence against women. We must end it, if we can, completely zero.
Thank you, President Sun Young, for that motivational message. I wish to thank the permanent mission of Romania to the UN for working with us. And we are pleased to have Mr. Simion-Adrian Purza with us. He is the current counselor within the Human Rights Division and also a member of the 3rd Committee. Thank you, Mr. Purza.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Good morning, first of all. I would like to say that I am truly grateful for the chance to speak today on a topic and at a time that are ever so relevant for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. For this opportunity, I would like to first thank the wonderful team at Soar Optimist International who have gone the extra length to put this event together during what I venture to believe is the busiest time of the year for equality activists everywhere. So we're grateful for that. Last week, the members of the Committee on the Status of Women adopted a strong political declaration. It celebrates the landmark achievements of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and also sets a course for a future where efforts must be doubled to further the empowerment of all women and girls while effectively responding to and actually fighting back against regressive actions and narratives that we've seen and unfortunately heard in the recent past. We are indeed witnessing an increasing trend in violence against women and girls. worldwide, and the societies are still marked by stigma and stereotypes. To adequately respond, we need to collectively reevaluate our national commitments, to reintegrate gender mainstreaming across all public policies, and to ensure that gender equality is central to every decision-making process government-wide. It is indeed a whole of society approach, and nothing less will suffice. And speaking about whole of society, we need to be mindful of the fact that achieving meaningful change requires developing cross-sectoral partnerships with civil society, the private sector, and international organizations as well. So there needs to be a synergy between these main actors in order to have concrete results. And also in concrete terms, I would like to just very briefly refer to the approach of my own country, Romania. We now have in place a national strategy seeking to promote equal opportunities and treatment between women and men, and also to prevent and combat domestic violence for the period from 2022 to 2027. It focuses on strengthening the legal protections, enhancing support services for survivors, and at the same time promoting gender-sensitive education. The ultimate overall goal is, of course, to foster a cultural shift towards inclusivity and equal opportunities, which is not easy to do, but we're working on it. We are also now in the final stages of adopting a national action plan for women's economic and political empowerment, which will run from 2025 to 2029. This plan will focus on key objectives, such as tailored labor market policies, improving work-life balance, of course, increasing gender parity in decision-making, and reinforcing legal frameworks to combat gender-based violence in both the workplace and in public spaces. But now, moving a bit closer to the general theme of today's event, I would like to refer to technology-facilitated gender-based violence. This phenomenon has unfortunately become a pervasive occurrence recently, and it includes acts such as online abuse, cyberstalking, and image-based harm, which were also reflected upon by President Xu Yang just before me. It also disproportionately affects women and girls. This highlights the need for innovation in addressing these evolving threats and ensuring that the human rights of women and girls are protected both offline and online. Actually, this year's political declaration contains some key references to the dual offline and online nature of violence, thus paving the way for increased awareness and focus. This will hopefully trickle down into national policies at some point and action plans and bring concrete results further along the way. At EU level, in May 2024, we adopted specific legislation to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls, including domestic and intimate partner violence, through measures for prevention, protection, support, and access to justice. It also, and this is important for our topic today, criminalizes widespread technology-facilitated gender-based violence, addressing the urgent issue of online violence that hinders women and girls' full participation in our societies. Before concluding, I would like to underscore two key paths for action, of course, out of many positive ideas that have been discussed in various formats these past 2 weeks at the CSW. First, leveraging technology for good. This means that we should drive technological innovation to combat violence and protect digital spaces for women and girls, focusing on stronger regulations, better access to technology and digital literacy, and of course, tackling online misogyny, which has been a pervasive, unfortunately, a pervasive phenomenon as well recently. And secondly, engage men and boys as allies. I cannot stress enough how important this is. They should be encouraged to challenge the negative examples of masculinity, reject violence, promote respectful relationships, and support gender equality, recognizing its benefits for all. Their involvement is crucial for dismantling harmful social structures. And I have to say, this last one rings especially true to me personally, because I am blessed with, let's say, gender parity among my 2 children, which to me translates both as a double dilemma, of course, but also, and I will dare to say especially, it translates as a double opportunity to do things right from the beginning. So that is why I would like to end here and to listen and learn from today's magnificent lineup of panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Purza. It was interesting to hear the work that Romania is doing, and I hope that we can continue to work together so that we can make an impact in stopping violence against all women and girls. And you also brought off the important point of how important it is to work with men and boys, because we will never stop the violence if men and boys are not included. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Ann K. Ream. Ann is an author and an activist, and she is the founder of @Center for Story and Witness. And Ann's mission is to work with survivors of violence and to work with them to tell their stories and make a difference for all women and girls. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Bev. Joe, if I can, you can go ahead and start the slides. That would be great. I'm really honored to be here this morning, and I've worked for a long time with Seroptimist, and I wanted to say how much I appreciate the way you yourselves have elevated the importance of survivor stories. So I know the other panelists are going to speak in great depth about the broader issue of technology facilitated violence, but I wanted to ground us in thinking about how survivor stories can play a critical role in addressing this issue, because I think it's never been more urgent. Next slide, please, Joe. If we can move, thank you. But I wanted to start from the perspective of why stories matter, and what they mean specifically to people who have lived through gender-based violence. And as Bev knows, and some of the folks on the call know, I've worked on a global storytelling project. And one of the people I interviewed for my own book was the wonderful author, Dorothy Ellison, who writes a beautiful memoir of having survived gender-based violence. And when I interviewed her, one of the things she said to me was, behind the story I tell is the one that I don't. Behind the story you hear is the one I wish I could make you hear. And to me, that really speaks to the huge chasm between what those of us who understand these issues know about gender-based violence, and that what those who have lived through it still have to tell. And so part of our challenge, I think, as activists, and particularly when we're looking at technology-based violence, is to create spaces where those aspects of story that people haven't been able to share are allowed to come forward. So next slide, please. So some of this I think we know intuitively, but I wanted to kind of remind people, story has really become a buzzword in social justice movements now. And people accept the idea of the importance of story, but I think it helps to ground us in what story actually does. So clearly, stories put names and faces to issues that often render survivors of gender-based violence silent and invisible. There would be no gender justice movement without individuals coming forward and saying, I lived through this, and this is what happened to me. Stories obviously show the human cost of injustice and violence. And one of the beautiful and painful things they do is they show that cost not only in the short term, which is what the media tends to focus on, but over time. Often in our writing programs, we have people coming in these workshops who were victims of violence 10, 20, 30 years ago. And they have stories to tell about how this has played out their life. Stories primarily and most importantly speak to what violence does to victims, but it also speaks to what violence does to family and communities. So when we find ways to share those stories, we can give the public a sense of why this isn't just gender-based violence, isn't just an urgent issue for people who are damaged. It's a broader issue for the culture. I'm a survivor of violence myself, gender-based violence. And so this next point is really, really dear to my heart. That if we don't find places to share the stories, not only of survivors' experiences of trauma and violation, but also their strength, their resiliency, their beauty, their power. Other survivors will not have models for how to live their own lives. And then finally, and I think in the highly politicized and partisan and fraught political moment we're in now, it's really important to reaffirm that there is a now growing, and I'd say at this point, very large body of research that shows that stories can be a more powerful indicator than statistics in changing mind, hearts, and laws. So if you're interacting with a policymaker and you lead with a story, or you bring a survivor in the room and together you speak truth and talk about the need for policy change, they are more inclined to vote in favor of the issue or law you're advocating for than they would be merely with statistics. Next slide, please. But why? So we know kind of broadly why survivor stories matter, but why are they particularly urgent now? We know we're in a moment where you have the rise globally of anti-democratic movements, and those movements, along with, as has been noted, the climate crisis. And when you have these social crises or movements, women and girls, as everyone on this call knows, are uniquely vulnerable. And we're in a moment where women and girls are uniquely vulnerable. We spend a lot of time in our organization in spaces looking at media and storytelling and representation. I don't think in my life since the 90s, I have seen a moment when misogyny has become as normalized and encouraged in the media, in opinion shaper spaces, obviously the digital world, where people who are accused or known sexual predators are in significant positions of power, where everyday survivors get up and have to read the paper and recognize that people making decisions for their lives are people who have violated women. This is the landscape we're in. Survivors also are facing new forms of pushback if they do come forward. So counter and defamation suits, organized digital campaigns, digital extortion. So this statement that my organization, that is almost 20 years old, has often made, which is your story is your power, and I believe it is, we also have to be really clear that our stories make us vulnerable in unique ways. And it's a challenge for those of us on this call to think about how we navigate this complicated space. And for all of those reasons, I would argue, we had a survivor who's a writer in one of our recent workshops who said, I feel like we're in a silencing moment. And we are in a silencing moment. Next slide, please, Joe. So if testimonies of the survivors of tech-enabled violence are key to the gender justice movement, how do we ethically support their development? Because we are not going to change the way the world sees this issue broadly, gender-based violence, or the way the world understands tech-enabled violence, because most people do not even understand the terms we've used thus far. So there's a major chasm here. So how do we develop these stories ethically and carefully? Next slide. The first thing I'd argue is we do it by creating spaces to help survivors reflect on the stories they wish to share and how they wish to share them. This is actually a photo of a community of survivors who took part in a 10-day storytelling workshop we did in South Africa, they were preparing to share their stories with the African National Congress and the Anglican Church. And the leaders on the ground took seriously enough the challenge of asking survivors to take the huge step to come forward and share their stories, that they had us work in community at the invitation of the community to help them really think about how they wanted to do that. So creating those spaces is key. Next slide, please. But I want us to think about three key terms when we think about the stories we encourage survivors to share, or the stories we perhaps as witnesses or advocates in this movement want to share. The first is we need to be strategic storytellers. We can look to history, to other movements to develop new strategies for using personal stories in a way that leads to political change. So in our workshops, we read Reverend King, Sandra Cisneros, Cynthia Ozick, the great Black poet, laureate Tracy K. Smith, and look at the ways they have used story to create change, because we have models that are powerful, and they're models across all forms of media. We need to do it ethically. We need to be really clear with survivors about the risk when sharing stories, as clear with survivors about the risk as we are about the rewards for our movement. And those risks change in the technology, in the landscape we're in now when we're looking at technology-enabled violence against women. And then finally, with investment, as Bev, one of the reasons I'm so extraordinarily loyal to Seroptimist is they saw the power of the work we were doing around storytelling long before people were talking about it, and recognized it, and through awarding our organization, actually invested in it. We need to see storytelling as a third leg of the movement to end gender-based violence, right alongside direct services and legal advocacy. If we don't think really seriously about how to move these stories into the world ethically, in a way that protects survivors, and strategically in a way that changes the way the world sees and responds to these issues, we will not succeed. We will not succeed. Next slide, please, Joe. And then finally, I do want to say on a positive note that bearing witness can be beautiful. You know, one of the things that I see every day in our writing program is the power of the stories, not only the stories that we share ourselves, but the stories that people share with us. So if you leave today with one thing, leave today with the idea that when you encounter the story of someone who's lived through technology-based violence, facilitated violence, or gender-based violence broadly, find ways to move those stories into the world. Next slide, please. So if you or your organization or you individually kind of know intuitively, and I think most of us do, that our stories really are our power, and the stories we encounter, if they've changed our minds and hearts, they'll change other people's minds and hearts. So if you're not sure where to start in thinking new ways about story sharing, Center for Story and Witness is actually here to help. So next slide, please. Just so you know, just a few basic things about what we do. We offer trauma-informed 2-day testimonial writing workshops for gender-based violence survivors and those who have witnessed gender-based violence. And we use witness broadly. People like you who are advocates, direct service providers, people working on advocacy. Anyone who is working in this space or has lived through this issue who wants to use their personal stories to create social change. These are immersive 2-day workshops. We only bring them when we're invited by community, and we would love to work with any Seroptimist chapter or anyone listening in on this call who's interested in having us come to community. The other programming we offer is narrative advocacy training. So if you get on our website, storyandwitness.org, you'll see a host of trainings we've created for advocates so they can start to think in new ways about the power, purpose, strategies for ethics of storytelling. Together in these workshops, we start to think about what is the issue I want to change and how can I think in new ways about using story to do that in my own community. And finally, we have, at this point, 1,300 writers have graduated from, globally, have graduated from our 2-day testimonial writing workshops. Another 26,000 people across the globe have taken part in our narrative advocacy trainings. And so we are sitting on an extraordinary body of story that has been developed by the writers and artists and survivors and advocates with our organizations. So we create performances and publications and campaigns that connect survivor stories to the public. So if you have an upcoming event, if you have a gap in understanding and you're thinking that bringing a video in the room or bringing something that breaks through, whether it's to an audience in the public or a policymaker or on Capitol Hill or in state houses or parliaments across the globe, we can help you create content that can create change. So next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier when I was just on the call with the speakers that I very much hope that we can connect. And so please connect to us on all the socials. I'd also welcome the chance to connect to you individually, because we really are building a global community of survivors and advocates using story to create change. And moments like this, where we interact with the extraordinary people doing this work on the front lines, particularly around technology-based violence, where there is such a huge gap between what is happening and what the public understands. I and we would love to work with you. And I just wanted to close. We can go to the final slide, Joe. Close with a thank you to not only Seroptimus, but my fellow speakers, because rooms like this, and everyone actually on this call, rooms like this make me very hopeful. And hope is something I think we desperately need in this moment. So thank you for that. And thank you, Bev.
Thank you, Anne, for bringing the stories of survivors to light and giving them a chance to heal. And thank you also for bringing us the concern regarding technology generated violence. I think that violence, technology generated violence, makes it even more difficult for survivors to come forward because of the backlash they might receive. And we need to all be aware. We need to educate the community on all the forms of technology-based violence. Thank you, Anne.
Yeah.
Our next speaker is Dr. Nina Smart. I'm happy to call Dr. Smart a friend. She is an artist, an author, and an activist for women's rights and gender-based violence. But in particular, her topic is female genital mutilation, which she has a story of her own to share. She escaped gender-based violence, and if you were in New York over the weekend, you might have had the opportunity to see a presentation of part of the opera that was written for her story. Her organization is Saving Wildflowers, and the opera was performed in collaboration with the Permanent Romanian Mission in New York. Thank you. And if I could please remind the speakers to keep to the time limits. Thank you.
Greetings,
Nina?
everybody. Can you hear me? Greetings, everyone. And bună seara for Romania and bună dimineața for New York. I'm very, very grateful to be here and present at CSW69. Joe, would you go to the next slide, please? The name of the organization I founded almost 21 years ago, it's called Servicing Wildflowers International, just founded in Los Angeles for the purpose to specifically address female genital mutilation and to provide support for girls and women at risk with FGM in the country of my father's origin, which is Sierra Leone. Next slide, please. There are many gender-specific harmful traditional practices that still, some of them are unknown, such as breast ironing in Cameroon. Many people do know about foot binding, which was abolished in China. I like to add this on because it shows that we are successful at our work. Removal of uvula in Algeria, and FGM, which is around the world, and this is what I will be concentrating on. Next slide, please. I am very grateful for the wonderful presentation that Anne just did in terms of using your story. And she said, your story is your power. I have shared the story of my escape and survival of the mental trauma that comes with facing female genital mutilation. And I proudly speak boldly against FGM as a Romanian girl who experienced this in West Africa. Next slide, please. It is important to understand that there are some regions around the world, such as Sierra Leone, where FGM is a cultural practice, was seen as initiation into secret society. And it is very important to understand that the women who practice and do the cutting, they are very powerful. Unfortunately, it is seen as men are not involved in the practice of FGM. And also, it is not viewed as violence against women. This is very important, as I will hopefully give you an idea of the change in face of FGM. Next slide, please. But just to remind all of us, since maybe it might not be very clear what female genital mutilation is considered, apart from a human rights violation, it includes all procedures that intentionally alter or injure the female genital organs, especially for non-medical reasons. In 1984, World Health Organization declared it as a human rights violation, and that is the year when I was getting ready to relocate from Romania to West Africa. And of course, at that time, most of the world had no idea about this practice. Next slide, please. It is estimated that about 230 million women and girls are living currently affected with the practice of female genital mutilation. Just yesterday, we had an amazing event here at CSW in New York. And I wanted to show this, where it says that the language that we use when we speak about FGM is very important. Hence, it is not circumcision. And it is really considered the terminology to be reflecting the violence that women have to endure. In Africa alone, over 3 million girls are at risk to be cut every year. Next slide, please. But FGM is practiced all over the world. Joe, would you? Thank you. In the US alone, we have over 500,000 girls and women who are at risk of FGM. I'm one of the founding members of the End FGM Task Force in Los Angeles, and also active in the US End FGM Network. And we are gathering more data, which is extremely difficult about this practice being secretive. Also in Europe, the numbers come up to over 190,000 girls which are at risk of FGM. So it is practiced according to the latest report, which was actually given yesterday, in 59 countries, in actually 94 countries around the world. And only 59 countries have laws that ban the practice of FGM. Next slide, please. There are international conventions, such as the Beijing Declaration of and Platform for Action. We are 30 years later still discussing the practice of FGM, which is extremely alive. Next, please. And FGM, unfortunately, it is culturally accepted. It is misunderstood. And that is why education is extremely important to address the practice. Next slide, please. There are many reasons given for performing FGM, starting with, of course, the control of women's sexuality, initiation into secret society, hygiene and aesthetics, health reason, unfortunately, religious reasons, and in the past decade, also it is connected with African identity. Next slide, please. I would like to highlight some of the best practices that have been efficient in helping us address this issue and reduce the number of girls who have been caught, such as working directly with cutters in rural areas. Next slide, please. It is very important that we do not blame the cutters, but we engage in non-violent conversations where we educate and explain, and slowly together from a grassroots perspective come to understand the harmful effects of the practice and offer alternative options for the cutters to be inclined or willing to drop the knife, as it is called. Next slide, please. It's also very important to understand that the group of women who are the cutters and perform the practice are very powerful. They have very critical political power for example, in Sierra Leone, or perhaps you might remember the case of the Gambia last year, when in the parliament, the law that banned FGM was going to be reversed. So working locally with local activists at the grassroots level and the politicians is extremely important in our efforts to protect girls. And may you please go to the next slide. I'm very grateful to Mr. Purza for highlighting the focus of CSW69 in terms of highlighting the role of men. And I have been speaking about the inclusion of men and boys in helping to end FGM for over a decade, because without their help, we will not be able to end this practice or address it. Next slide, please. I have a picture here which was taken in rural Sierra Leone, Kamakuye, where if you look towards the back of all the people sitting down, you see a young group of men. They were so enthusiastic and happy to hear the member of the parliament that came to address this issue. Breaking the silence on FGM it is still very difficult at the local level where this is prevalent, over 96%. Next slide, please. But there is also the indirect involvement of men, such as discussions or intergenerational meetings that happen around the table, such as in this picture. And please, let's go to the next slide. Or the direct involvement of members of parliament by creating laws that help ban the practice of FGM. This is extremely important. And my study for for my PhD was in the Parliament of Sierra Leone, where I had the opportunity to interview longitudinal study all the members of the parliament on the absence of a ban on the practice. And in the lower right corner, you do see a picture with all the community and the importance of including men in our discussions. Next picture, please. Also, the role of politicians and diplomats. I have had a wonderful opportunity to work with Romanian diplomats, and I am very, very grateful for the support that I have received in my 20 plus years of addressing this issue as a Romanian girl who have faced the practice of FGM, but not only from Romania, also from African countries, the president of Sierra Leone, and of course, you can see a picture with the ambassador from Japan here at the United Nations. One very important role is played by the traditional leaders. And in West Africa, many of the traditional leaders are also men. This is really important because they do have the power to directly suggest to the cutters who are critical in their voting, so they can replace the actual cutting with symbolic rituals, so the girls can still continue to become members of the secret society without having to undergo harmful practice. Next slide, please. I will not be able to continue or end my presentation without highlighting the role of religious leaders, and that is both Christians and Muslim at the local level, and it is everywhere, not only in West Africa, but right here in the US. We work closely in California with ministers. And finally, as Bev so kindly said when she introduced me, the role of artist and musician. We are using music to amplify our power to be able to end the practice by drawing attention to the importance of ending FGM and including men in the process. I'm very proud that the composer of the opera is a New York-based Brazilian composer, and hopefully a he for she who is bringing the story on the global stage. And I thank everyone who attended on Friday. There is also the importance of making sure that we do trust our local partners to do the actual work. Would you please change the slide? And we have a picture here of one of the activists we work closely with. And I'm very grateful that for the past 17 years, Soroptimists have been critical and enthusiastically supporting the efforts that we have made in Sierra Leone through the school, next slide, please, and also through the vocational center to bring attention to the practice, to educate and protect girls. Of course, it is education, not mutilation. This is very important, not only for the children, for the girls, but for all the members of the community, as Mr. Purza correctly addressed in the beginning, and also educating families and educating girls about their African identities. Next slide, please. It is important not to blame the women who have no education, but despite the challenges that they have faced in life, we can also offer adult education. And next slide, please. And we are very, very grateful that there has been so much attention to education in Sierra Leone, where we have had the wonderful opportunity of protecting girls without fear of kidnapping in the school, with the support of Soroptimists from the Camino Real region and other SIA regions, as well as lately from SIE, which is, of course, the Union of Denmark. Next slide, please. It is important to see that the girls are happy, and we are not only educating girls, we are also including the boys, as Mr. Purza highlighted. It is important to teach both boys and girls that they are equal, they are capable, and they can do anything. I would like to end, next slide, please, with some pictures from the vocational center and the next slide, please. And the African stores that some of the women from the vocational centers, they end up having. Next slide, please. The farming, where also through Soroptimist projects, we have provided seed money for women to engage in that, the women who dropped the knife, so economically empowerment. Next slide, please. And so the whole idea is we engage in the conversation, but the best practice is when we are able to assist them in replacing their vocation and understanding that they can positively contribute to society. Next slide, please. Breaking the silence on FGM has been my passion, and I'm very grateful, next slide, please, that we are lending our voices to through the media. And about 4 years ago, we had the Soroptimist 6. Some of them have been the one on top, Rugiato Nene, she is one of the activists that I've worked with for about 18 years, and she is extremely powerful, like the other ones, and I'm sure you all know about the Soroptimist 6. Next slide, please. I am very grateful that by breaking the silence on the practice of female genital mutilation, we can continue to preserve the culture. And next slide, please, and continue to initiate girls so the girls can be educated and not have to sell peanuts in the market, but they can continue to go to school. So I would like to end by highlighting some of the programs that we have promoted to end FGM, such as the free school for boys and girls, and a special thank you to the many clubs in Soroptimist of Europe that have supported our efforts, including the Romanian Union that I'm now part of, the free vocational school for ex-sex workers, Safe House, where we protect girls from FGM, the only safe house in Sierra Leone. And the most important is the breaking of the silence on FGM, which is why we're here today, organizing SOWE's declarations to end FGM, women's empowerment workshop, men's involvement in addressing and ending the practice of FGM. We need the men. And working with the politicians as well as with religious and traditional leaders. So I would like to thank you for the opportunity to learn more about this practice. And I encourage you to stand up and speak up against the practice of female genital mutilation. Last slide, please. Thank you. Can you please change the slide?
Thank you, Nina, for your work. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. And it is all because of the beautiful girls that we are protecting so they can be educated, not mutilated. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina, for your outstanding presentation. you have been an advocate for FGM for such a long time, and we appreciate everything you are doing. There she is.
The time is now.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Education is key. It's education at all levels to stop the violence and to create solutions to ending FGM. I would like to now introduce Gail. Gail Dekran is a semi-retired Superior Court judge from California, from San Francisco, and she has had many cases concerning of gender-based violence come before her. Gail?
Good morning, everybody. And can everyone hear me all right? Very good. And I've also faced it in my job. It's not surprising. Did you know I'm going to be speaking of the AI threat of physical and social violence in proposed solutions? And did you know that AI was a 2-month summer study project by 10 male students in 1956 at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire? That is how it got started. Male students. My name is Gail Dekran. I am a semi-retired Superior Court judge in San Francisco and a member of Seroptimist. And thank you all for attending this Zoom meeting, which is fabulous so far. Today, I will briefly introduce you to AI, artificial intelligence, describe its impact on women and girls, and look to the solutions proposed to protect ourselves, all in 9 minutes. Can I have the next slide, please? By introduction, over the last 69 years, AI, which is a combination of computer science and data sets to stimulate human intelligence and skills, is being used in healthcare, finance, education, retail, manufacturing, agriculture, sales, and robotics. And what is a data set? It is a structured collection of data organized and stored together for analysis or processing. The data with the data set is typically related in some way and taken from a single source or intended for a single project. Next slide. The problem is the negative impact. That was the introduction. Okay, next slide. Sorry. The problem is the negative impact on women and girls. For healthcare, for instance, AI analyzes data that has been fed to reinforce correct answers and limit incorrect ones in the diagnosis and treatment of medical conditions. But in women's healthcare, it lacks data. Why? Because until 1993, women weren't allowed to participate in clinical trials. And even though our participation in clinical trials has increased over the past 30 years, the studies that analyze data by sex have not. Good old AI is analyzing the wrong data for women and girls' healthcare. This is called AI gender bias. AI treats people differently on the basis of their gender. And that is what it learned, because that is what it learned from the biased data it was trained on. AI is only as good as the data used to teach it. There is a bias in AI because the data it works with is based on institutionalized biases in language and culture and other things. If the data originally collected 10 years ago contains certain biases, it will be replicated by the algorithms that are used. And when used for prolonged periods of time, this reinforces the biases in decision-making. For example, technology is equated with, quote, unquote, men's power, while women and girls are, quote, portrayed, unquote, as less technologically skilled and less interested in it. But we have all heard that. We've all heard this, yet we all know women and girls who excel in technology, right? In 2019, 6 years ago, only 12% of AI researchers were women, and they represented only 6% of software developers and were 13 times less likely to file an ICT patent, that's information communication technology patent, for their work than men do. No patent, no glory for acknowledgement. As of 2025, women now make up 22% of AI professionals worldwide, but still only 12% of AI researchers. In academic publishing, female researchers account for just 29% of first authors on AI papers, a number that has not increased since the mid-2000s. And get this, There is a tendency to feminize AI tools premised on pre-assigned gender roles. Home-based virtual assistants like Alexa and Siri were given default feminine voices with submissive personalities, that is, helpful, intelligent, intuitive. But IBM's Watson uses a masculine voice while working with physicians or cancer treatments, and male voices are preferred for teaching and instruction because they are perceived as authoritarian and assertive. The employment sectors in recent years that see increased robotization are those usually dominated by women, such as hospitality, tourism, retail, healthcare, and education. Human women are losing jobs. The humanization of virtual assistants and robots allows also for the dehumanization and objectification of women and girls. Since AI's female characteristics are predominantly developed by men, they mirror their ideas about women. So we need to increase women's participation in STEM education and careers, and consequently learn how to deal with the problem of women in STEM careers globally being subjected to sexual harassment in their workplaces. We need to do more to protect women and girls from people who take or manipulate intimate photos or who publish personal information, misinformation, in order to hound, harass, and humiliate them. There is pushback to legislate criminal laws against this conduct due to perceptions such as legislating for hurt feelings and the First Amendment right of free speech in the United States. Cyber harassment is defined as posting information online about a person without that person's consent, with the intent to place the alleged victim in fear for their safety or for the safety of someone in their immediate family. It can include sending abusive text messages or images, posting abusive messages on social media, neighbor disputes that involve abusive behavior or damage to property. What starts as online abuse can swiftly spiral into danger that extends beyond screens and borders, making it impossible for many women to feel safe at home, work, or in public spaces. No one should have to live in fear just for existing online. The digital world should be a safe space for everyone. In a UN Secretary General report published in 2024, 3 emerging challenges were identified that need both governments and the technology sector to do more to protect the rights of women and girls. And these challenges are, as we've already heard, the growing backlash against women's rights, the rapid rise of artificial intelligence, AI, the expansion of the manosphere and ecosystem of misogynistic content that is seeping into mainstream culture, shaping public attitudes towards women, and fueling violence. Here are some new acronyms for us. TFVAWG, Technology Facilitated Violence Against Women and Girls. And I know you've heard this one. TFGBV, Technology Facilitated Gender-Based Violence. The main forms are defamation, violent threats, astroturfing, misinformation, hate speech images and video-based abuse, doxing, impersonation, cyber harassment, hacking, and stalking. While all women and girls are at risk, some groups are disproportionately affected. Women in the public eye and marginalized women and girls continue to be most affected by tech gender-based violence. These include, as I said, women in public life, journalists, women human rights defenders, politicians, feminist activists, and young women and girls. Next slide. There are solutions on how to reduce gender bias in AI systems. It is crucial that the data used to train AI systems is diverse and represents all genders, races, and communities. We must actively feed data to AI that reflects different social backgrounds, cultures, and roles, while removing historical biases, such as those that associate specific jobs or traits with one gender. AI systems should be created by diverse development teams made up of people from different genders, races, and cultural backgrounds to reduce the blind spots that can lead to biased AI systems. AI should be used to identify and address gender inequalities across sectors, such as pay gaps in the workforce, gender biases in credit scoring, improve microfinance services for women entrepreneurs, and tracking gender representation in leadership roles. Happily, there are advancements in AI offering solutions to address digital abuse and to protect survivors. There are mobile apps like Be Safe to provide safety alerts to protect women, like Butler AI that helps victims understand if sexual harassment incidents they've experienced violate U.S. or Canadian criminal laws. Sophia.chat by Spring Act and Rainbow, which is produced by All for Good, offers a safe place to ask questions online and get help and find resources addressing gender-based violence in their communities. The bottom line is we need a more inclusive AI system to reduce, not perpetuate, the biases and inequalities in our societies. Xenia Del Villar, the Director of Data Technology and Innovation at Data Pop Alliance, recommends these 5 steps to achieve this. Using diverse and representative data sets to train AI systems. Improving the transparency of algorithms in AI systems. Making sure AI development and research teams are diverse and inclusive to avoid blind spots. Adopting strong ethical frameworks for AI system and integrating gender responsive policies in developing AI systems. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail, for highlighting some of the problems and solutions to AI. As AI continues to be developed and part of our life, we must all work together to ensure that our governments create safe spaces and laws to take care of all of us. Thank you. Our next presenter is Benita Zerillo. And Benita is a member of parliament in British Columbia, and she might be able to give us some examples on how gender-based violence is used against politicians and women in power through AI and computer-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bev, and just maybe a thumbs up if you can hear me okay.
Yep.
Benita Zerillo, and I'm here on the unceded and traditional territory of the Kwikwetlem and the shared territories of the Coast Salish people in the northwest corner of Canada. And it's also the home neighborhood of Amanda Todd. And many of you may have seen and know of the story of Amanda Todd, a young 15-year-old teenager who told her story online in postcards about how she had been cyberbullied and took her life at the age of 15. And her mother, Carol Todd, who still works in the school district here, continues to go across the world advocating for safety for girls, women and girls, children online. And we know that the ability to have safety at home has always been threatened in gender-based violence, and this aspect of a digital way to cause harm and to not be safe at home just adds more and more pressure to women and girls in this country. So when we talk about Amanda Todd, her mother was in contact with me as a new online harm bill was introduced in the House of Commons in the 44th Parliament here in Canada. And this bill became very controversial among parties within the House of Commons because of a thought that it was infringing on freedom of speech to want to protect people from online harm. And so after much discussion and delay, the government decided that they would break apart the online harms bill to at least try to protect children. And this would have helped Amanda Todd, and Carol Todd, her mother, was heavily involved in wanting to make sure that this part of the legislation passed. So really what they were looking for was a commission, a strategy around digital harms, kind of mirrored after what's happening in New Zealand. And so many parents and advocates were very excited about having some sort of legislation. Unfortunately, the government was prorogued. There was a lot of divisiveness in the House of Commons here in Canada over the last year or so. Unfortunately, this right versus left has really played out here in Canada as well. And the government was prorogued just before Christmas. And that lost all of legislation. All of the legislation that was on the docket was lost. I heard from Amanda's mother immediately. I mean, they were all devastated that there was steps made forward, and here we are taking steps back again. So there was a lot of hope around some protections, parliamentary protections. But what we know is laws aren't always enforced and laws don't always work. So I think about we had a law, C-18 here in Canada, that was passed just over a year ago, trying to protect local news, local information, asking the web giants to pay for their access to local news. And how that played out in Canada here, and many of you may know this, is that the web giants stopped sharing local news, actually stopped the access to news on Facebook and Instagram. Now, what this allowed for was a lot of unrest in community. A lot of people blame the government that they can't get news on their Facebook feed, they can't get news on their social media feed, but it's actually a choice by the web giants. And I guess my point here is I wanted to share with you is like the web giants are unregulated. The web giants are allowing incidents like what happened to Amanda Todd, very little checking or oversight or enforcement of harms to children, never mind women and other marginalized groups. So we're really in a fight here, folks. We're really in a fight. So in Canada, we have just less than 1/3 of our parliament who are women. And this is the most women we've ever had in parliament over time. And just this morning, it was announced on the news we may be going to an election here in Canada. It may be called on Sunday. By the end of April, we're going to go to another election. And it happened because of a change in the leadership of our Liberal Party here. The Liberal Party changed leadership. A new leader was announced on Sunday last week. And that new leader moved immediately to changing their cabinet. And when they changed that cabinet, they removed the Gender Equality Ministry. They removed the Seniors Ministry. They removed the Disability Ministry. And they removed the Labor Ministry. They deprioritized all of this. And what it really went to show was how leadership matters and how who makes the decisions in your country really matter. So as women, and I'm an NDP member of Parliament, and we have a very strong caucus, Indigenous and Women's and LGBTQ plus caucus, and we immediately stood up and said, this isn't right. We can't do this. We should be able to do two things at once. We should be able, and we know we can, have a strong economy and also protect the most vulnerable groups. So I think about the fact that as women politicians, we try to stand up. We do stand up. But as it's been mentioned on this call today, we receive a lot of online hate, a lot of bots. A lot of this is not people, but words are powerful, whether it comes from a person or a bot. And so for myself personally, I can say that I'm careful what I say online when it has to do with local social media here for my own children, but also for my staff. Unfortunately, in this divisive rhetoric, and someone had mentioned the manosphere, and it's interesting because in Winnipeg, Manitoba, we have a Human Rights Museum, and they have a exhibition right now about the manosphere and just how much men are controlling the narrative right now, and that aggressive stereotype is being rewarded, and women who are speaking up are being attacked online. So if I speak about abortion, if I speak about misogyny, if I even speak about women and girls, there is an attack that happens. Now, I don't experience as much as my Indigenous colleagues. I have a number of Indigenous colleagues who are women. One of them is Leah Gazan, who raised the profile of Indigenous women who were potentially murdered and sent to a garbage dump. And many of you who watch the Canadian news might know that there was a fight between right and left politically if the garbage dump should be searched. And my colleague Leah Gazan led the charge on this with the families and through the labor movement. And just last week and this week, they found 2 of the 3 women, Megan, Morgan, and Mercedes, were found recovered, and their families got them back and they came home. So this is the important work of women. As many folks have said today on this call, it's a fight, folks. It is a fight. We are being silenced. Thank you for Anne for talking about that. We are being silenced. We are still pushing back as parliamentarians and as members of parliament. But the work is getting tougher and tougher because the web giants are limiting the actual factual news. Journalists are not able to cover stories. There is no money in journalism these days. The web giants aren't willing to pay for any of the content that they get from those journalists. And the false narrative, the disinformation, the bots, the foreign interference are all hurting women, girls, LGBTQ plus community. All of them are being impacted heavily. So I guess on my call to action is, please, if you have elections locally, even at the school board level, please just do your due diligence, do your fact checking, try not to share things that you haven't fact checked yourself, and be safe out there, folks. Be safe out there. We have a lot of work to do to fight back on this digital era, and we just need to keep having forums like that, like this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Benita. So much that we need to think about as we move forward and the change from left to right happens. We need to all look at who our political leaders are, do our due diligence, and of course, vote. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Linda Witung-Abram, and Linda is a former prosecutor. She currently works on cold cases, and she is a researcher extraordinaire for Seroptimus International and many other organizations. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Bev. I volunteered to go toward the end because we were getting a little bit late in our presentations, but people had a lot to say. I'm going to briefly talk about the Convention Against Cybercrime that just got passed after a 5-year negotiation. I have a very long outline if you want to know all the ins and outs, what it does and what it doesn't do. But here is what is concerning the women. Without taking urgent action, the use of information and communication technologies could have a considerable negative impact on the increasing scale, speed, and scope of criminal offenses. The treaty covers many areas where women and girls would be concerned about: hacking, online child exploitation, fraud, theft, money laundering, corruption, acts of terrorism, trafficking in persons, the smuggling of migrants, the illicit manufacturing of traffic in firearms, their parts, components, and ammunition, and illicit trafficking in cultural property. The preamble talks about the importance of mainstreaming gender perspective in all relevant efforts in order to prevent and combat offenses covered by this convention. Taken alone, that's a step in the right direction. But folks, there are some things that we need to, down the line, quickly correct. We, first of all, have some missed opportunities in talking about gender mainstreaming in all of the crimes. Article 15, for example, talks about solicitation and grooming for the purpose of committing a sexual offense against a child. It doesn't talk specifically about women or girls, or more specifically, girls that are disabled. Article 16 talks about non-consensual dissemination of intimate images. Again, it does not mention vulnerable women and girls or those who are disabled who may not be able to give consent to what is going on. And some would argue that there's very few times where they are going to be given valid consent. We then move to Article 14, which I immediately sort of had a question about, and I don't presume to know exactly what the state's thinking were. I know that they were trying to do the best they could under the circumstances. Article 14, though, I think we need to correct and correct fast. Article 14 talks about criminalizing offenses against online child sexual abuse and exploitation material, with the scope defined in actions such as producing, distributing, or possessing material. However, Article 14 does not specifically mention women. And while mentioning children, does not specifically mention girls, despite broader discussions, I'm told, during negotiations about the importance of gender mainstreaming within this particular portion. In addition, there was a resolution that was created and adopted by the UN General Assembly, which did, during the same time frame, specifically talk about gender-related crimes in technology and the cybersecurity issues on cyberstalking, intimate image abuse, gendered hate speech, deepfake exploitation, and surveillance and privacy violations, as well as economic crimes. These were not gender mainstreamed in this particular treaty. And again, it's interesting that the UN General Assembly resolution does mainstream that and the treaty didn't. Again, I know these states were trying to do the best they could. Here comes the cavalry trying to help us, and I thank them for the attempts that they have done. And I hope, without going again into all of the good things that they did, because I don't have time to talk about that at this point, I thank them for all of those. I join many critics or many groups to say we need to have gender mainstreaming in some of these other sections, which you did address, but not specifically women and girls. Thank you very much for your time. Bev, I hope I'm really brief and to the point and leave time for Tanya. Thank you.
Dear Linda, you certainly were. If anyone wants information, Linda's your person, and she has a lot of research on this topic. So just put a note in the chat and we'll connect you with Linda. Thank you. Our next speaker is Rita Noriega Ramos, who is the SIE leading advocacy. She's leading advocacy efforts as the Vice President of Advocacy. Rita?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I see that my presentation is in the first slide. Can we move to the next one, please? Okay, thank you very much. So, good day, first of all, Mr. Representative of the Permanent Embassy of the Mission of Romania to the United Nations, dear representatives of the Conference of Non-Governmental Organizations in Consultative Relationship with the United Nations, and dear Sir Optimists and participants. It is with a great honor that I represent Sir Optimist International of Europe at CSW69 and speak about our commitment to eliminate cyber violence against women and girls. CSW remains the most significant global platform for advancing women's rights. Yet, as the UN Secretary General reminded us days ago during the opening session, and again in the town hall meeting with civil society, women are encouraged to shout if they are not being listened, to speak up, because systemic change and accountability remain lacking.
Sorry, Rita, I'm just having a bit of an issue with the slides. Just bear 1 second.
I'm not sure what can be happening, but if you want, I can share my screen.
It's okay. They're just it's automatically going through them rather than doing it as I select it. 1 second, sorry.
No problem, of course. If you want, just for the purposes of
Yep, try that.
yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's okay now. So I was saying, as the UN Secretary General reminded us days ago during the opening session of CSW, and again in the town hall meeting with civil society, women are encouraged to shout if they are not being listened, to speak up, because systemic change and accountability are lacking. He also noted that new technologies as artificial intelligence are creating more misogyny and online revenge, and pointed out that 95% of all online deepfakes are non-consensual pornographic images, with 90% depicting women and girls. So violence against women is indeed a global crisis, and cyber violence is the fastest growing form. For Seroptimist International of Europe, of course, doing nothing is not an option. We are a leading organization. We have worked for long to improve the lives of women and girls through education, empowerment, and advocacy. And we are the largest of the 5 Seroptimist International federations, bringing together nearly 30,000 women across 43 countries in Europe, the Middle East, and the Caribbean in order to drive change. So it's very important that I bring this issue to you today and talk about a project that we have been developing, which is very, very important, the Read the Signs. You can move to the next slide, please. It's okay. So SIE ensures women's rights remain high on the global agenda by engaging with the United Nations ECOSOC, where we hold consultative status, having active participation here at CSW and the other UN forums. At the Council of Europe, we have our representative of the Council of Europe with us tonight, Jutta. We work towards full implementation of the Gold Treaty on Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, the Istanbul Convention, and therefore our federation promotes now a strong action plan. We have launched the figure of the Istanbul Convention promoters, and we are making sure that all our members will be ambassadors of these very important, legally binding and comprehensive standards and obligations, the Istanbul Convention, I repeat. Then we are at the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and also the Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, and also at the European Women's Lobby. And of course, we engage with other NGOs and work at grassroots levels, ensuring that advocacy is both top-down and bottom-up. You can move to the next slide, please, Joe. So just to briefly explain that Seroptimists transform advocacy into action through education, empowerment, eliminating violence against women, health and food security, and sustainability. So with over 7,000 projects we have implemented last year, our members have made a tangible impact across all these 5 areas. Then moving to the next slide, I will now start the explanation of our important initiative. During the Orange the World campaign, SIE Read the Signs initiative is, of course, a key moment of our annual advocacy calendar. In 2024 and 2025, our focus was on cyber violence and on prevention, aligning with the first pillar of the Istanbul Convention. We decided to focus on prevention because we need to work transformational and systemic changes where education is key, not only by reacting to problems, by protecting, the second pillar of the Istanbul Convention, but instead being ahead and working for the future of our future generations, of our sons, grandsons, and so on. This is a very important slide that represents how maybe we are not looking at the figures which have been in front of us all the time. While reactive measures are important, of course, they are not sustainable. There is a research by the European Institute of Gender Equality pointing out that per year, European countries spend 360 billion euros to address violence against women. Prevention and proactiveness is therefore crucial, not only for women, but for national economies. Structures has helplines, counseling, psychological and medical support, training, social counseling and shelters, mobilization of specialists, and of course the loss of economic contribution of all those involved in this problem is something that is very objective. No country can afford violence against women. It is such a burden. So through the Read the Signs, we have emphasized the importance of being alert to warning indicators because early intervention is crucial and prevents further harm. So, Sun Optimists focused on cyber violence for all these reasons, and we decided to do the campaign in 2024 and again in 2025. Early enough, we prepared a briefing of the campaign, we shared it with our members, we provided information on the definition of cyber violence, the impact of cyber violence on mental health and victimization, the signs of cyber violence, such as withdrawal from social media, emotional distress, changes of behavior, essential for early intervention and support. And then we started with actions to inspire our members with ideas for the campaign. Simultaneously, our federation organized a number of webinars. First, to prepare members for the campaign. And after that, we started inviting experts to let members and advocates in our organization be aware and knowledgeable about the theme and the problems and legislation, of course. At the same time, we provided campaign communication guidelines and posters. And then we provided videos. Maybe Joe can show us one of the videos that we have prepared. So all these materials we have inspired and motivated our members to initiate the campaign during the 16 days of activism. And when we did that, we asked them to do it by education, promoting digital literacy and online safety tips in schools and universities, and promoting respectful behavior online, collaborating with tech companies and doing advocacy, pressuring tech companies and policymakers, sharing support services, connecting victims with resources, sharing the social media material, making women and girls stay safe in online through a list of safety measures. And what we have done, I will just tell you briefly some of the things that happened across Europe in some of the countries. But to tell you just a bit, you can see in this image how people mobilized. But in Bulgaria, they engaged influencers and performed public awareness events outside. In Germany, they hosted legal webinars and invited specialists and politicians. In Norway, there were also coordinated community discussions on the topics. In Portugal, there was the launch of an e-book for youth and educators aimed to change and transform online behavior. In Sweden, there was partnerships with women's shelters and advocacy groups. In Switzerland, They focused on men's role in prevention. In Greece, they hosted cybersecurity lectures and they eliminated landmarks in orange. In Belgium, they distributed bread bags with a helpline information. In Turkey, they ran national awareness campaigns that reached more than 60,000 people. So everywhere, our members have done all sorts of actions concentrated on this topic, and they contributed, of course, to a great awareness on cyber violence and to enhance digital literacy. And these are just a few of the examples from a large-scale action held by them. So I want to tell you something, that cyber violence, you can move to the next slide, Joe, please. Yes, these are other examples. You can switch to the next one, please. Very well, thank you. So cyber violence can come across any of us. And it is not just an online problem, it is a violation of human rights in the form of discrimination against women and girls. I recently heard to a very, very interesting researcher, Professor Olga Uras, and she highlighted key dimensions of cyber violence that we should always keep in mind. Cyber violence is a continuum. It's often linked to offline violence. It isolates victims. Many withdraw from public and digital spaces forever. It spreads fast. Harmful content can go viral in seconds. It is enabled by anonymity. Perpetrators are often untraceable. It is permanent, and once online, abuse can resurface forever. It is amplified by algorithms. Digital platforms magnify harmful content. So the Read the Science campaign contributed to a stronger accountability, to better reporting mechanisms, and to better support. And of course, we can do much more. We can advocate for the improvement of laws in international frameworks like the Global Digital Compact and full implementation of the Istanbul Convention, the way that the EU directive on violence against women, which was adopted in 2024, will be implemented after the end of the transition period of 3 years in 2027. The way that digital flaggers introduced a figure which was introduced by the Digital Services Act will be having a major role in warning and reporting and quick intervention. All this is a wake-up call, and the problem is this problem is not new. It's only more visible than ever. You can remember the way that hate campaign was directed against the actress in Romeo and Juliet, or AI deep fakes of Taylor Swift. So there is more visibility of this issue, and all we can do is play a crucial role in ensuring that it remains a priority issue, because it is very intimidating, it silences women, and we need disaggregated, robust data. We need to build effective policies, better policies, and we cannot allow that there is a normalization of online violence. There is a trend of normalization of online violence that we need to make sure it will not continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you very much, Rita, for that wonderful presentation. You can visit Erasmus International of Europe to find out more about what is being done in that federation. Our final speaker to give us his comments is Reverend Liberato Batista, or Levi, who is the president of the Conference of NGOs in Consultation Relationship with the UN, and he is based in New York. Thank you, Levi.
Good morning from New York indeed. Thank you, Beverly, for the kind introduction. Mr. Purza of the Permanent Mission of Romania to the UN, President Siyang Ganalingam of Seroptimus International, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. The Conference of NGOs in Consultative Relationship with the UN is deeply honored to co-sponsor this CSW69 side event with Seroptimus International, one of Congo's over 600 member NGOs and a member of the Congo board. Our topic today is timely and indeed urgent. Our panelists have communicated this message because 30 years after Beijing and 20 years after the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, the harsh reality of violence against women and girls remains a global emergency. Addressing this emergency is crucial, significantly, since social media platforms, tools created through information communication and digital technologies have exacerbated this violence. Our panelists today have spoken of the concern for safer, accessible, and affordable digital technology that empowers rather than perpetuates offline violence against women and girls. This was the focus of a joint statement initiated by Seroptimus International and Congo. On International Women's Day, March 8, 2025, we issued this statement. As of today, 124 civil society groups, including 99 NGOs with ECOSOC consultative status, have endorsed this statement. Ms. Doreen Bogdan Martin, the Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union, a UN entity, wrote back after the receipt of a copy of the statement. She said, while artificial intelligence offers transformative opportunities in education, healthcare, and economic growth, we must also remain vigilant about potential risks, including algorithmic biases. As we conclude this insightful event, I want to emphasize certain sections of the CSW69 political declaration. That political declaration states that we must ensure women and girls have equal access to safe, accessible, and affordable digital technology. Within the broader framework, I suggest that we should view access as a means of empowerment and capacity building for women and girls, which in turn transforms access into a way to uphold their human rights and fundamental freedoms, including participation in all decision-making processes that affect them, that affect their bodies and their communities. Digital access is therefore vital, and this event has reinforced that understanding. However, digital access is meaningful and sustainable only under just and equitable economic conditions and democratic and peaceful political conditions as well. Access flourishes under arrangements that protect civil and democratic rights to information and communications justice. The uneven development of economies today unduly imperils every aspect of that access, and women and girls are doubly punished under such conditions. Addressing the digital divide must align with the larger aim of achieving social and economic justice. Again, speeches that you've heard in this event underscore this. These issues are interconnected with gender, communications, and digital justice. No single agenda can thrive without the others, as the root causes of social injustice, including entrenched patriarchy, persist in marginalizing women and girls. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by reminding us of what some of you may have heard me describe our world today as one that is filled with fear and lacking in hope. We gather at CSW69 holding this event knowing that the multilateral agenda and the international law supporting it are under attack. Every speech from our panelists illustrates why we must safeguard this multilateral space called the United Nations and emphasize the critical importance of civil society vigilance. The multilateral framework for digital governance needs strengthening, and civil society organizations are a vital component we must protect. Let me conclude with a quote from the CSW69 political declaration, which reflects the focus of this timely event. I quote, "Adopting a comprehensive approach to eliminating violence that occurs through or is amplified by the use of technology, including its design, development, and deployment. This involves combating the use of digital tools such as social media, online platforms, and artificial intelligence for the purpose of harassment, racism, trafficking in persons, and all forms of sexual exploitation and abuse of women and girls." I hope you found this 1.5-hour event insightful, critical in furthering civil society vigilance on these and all intersecting issues that have been brought to the fore. Have a great day.
Thank you, Levi. I want to thank all the presenters for outstanding presentations. We've learned a lot, and we know that we have a lot of work to do. Okay, well then, this concludes the webinar. Thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you very much.